Welcome back to Coffee Kurosawa, the podcast where two friends with very different ideas about film grab a coffee and chat about what they've been watching. I am Ben Filipkowski, a coffee-drinking, art house film-loving fanatic.
And I am Farrah Sarpkaya, a person who loves film, but like in a super chill, why do I love movies that make me cry sort of way. And speaking of movies that make me cry, today we are watching the 1998 film What Dreams May Come, starring Robin Williams, Annabella Sciorra, Cuba Gooding Junior, and Max von Sydow. This film is rated PG-13 and comes with some trigger warnings, including suicide. So if this is not for you, that's okay. Join us next time. What Dreams May Come is, if nothing else, visually striking, which, to be honest, is going to maybe be challenging to talk about in an audio-only media, but I'm going to try and paint you a picture, pun intended. It also jumps around a bit. Time is kind of a construct, particularly in the Land of the Dead in this movie, but I'll do my best. There is going to be some hand-waving, so go watch it if the film intrigues you. This movie begins when Chris Nielsen, played by Robin Williams, has an unlikely meet-cute with a beautiful girl by a lake, an artist named Annie, played by Annabella Sciorra, and they fall in love. They marry and have 2 children, but luck is not on their side. The children die in a car accident, and Annie, in her grief, attempts suicide. Chris helps her recover, and they try to learn to live again. However, 4 years later, tragedy strikes again when Chris is killed while attempting to help the survivors of a car accident. Chris is guided through death by a man who claims to be an old mentor, Al, played by Cuba Gooding Junior, and is reunited with their family dog and then his daughter. During his time in heaven, Chris is able to communicate with Annie and see her emotions through the world that he has created, his own heaven, based on her paintings. Al has never seen anything like this, leading him to believe that Chris and Annie are soulmates. After some time has passed, Al comes to Chris and tells him that not only is Annie dead, but she can't join him in heaven because she's died by suicide. Chris refuses to accept this and insists that he will save her. Al sees that there is no convincing Chris to not try to do this, so they recruit a guide to find her. They do so after a very visually striking adventure into what is referred to as hell. The guide sends Chris inside to where Annie is holed up, telling him that if he takes too long, spends too much time with Annie, Chris, too, will lose his mind and be trapped with Annie forever. Chris enters the crumbling ruin of their home and tries to pull Annie back, but fails. He decides instead to join her in hell and succumbs to his own grief, thus in turn helping Annie emerge from hers. Chris blacks out and awakens again in heaven, Annie this time by his side. After some time together, he asks if she would like to try again. He says, "I found you in hell. Do you think I won't find you in Jersey?" And so they're reincarnated, and the film closes as Chris begins the story again, and a pair of children meet and exchange peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The narration says again, "When I was young, I met this beautiful girl by a lake." So, Ben, you have a lot of feelings about this movie. I picked it because it's beautiful, but, that's not really why we're here. So talk to me about your impressions again as you watched it, last week.
First of all, Jersey's catching some unnecessary strays in this movie. That's, wow, harsh. I remember seeing this movie at the local video store when it came out. There was a big poster, and I thought it looked so interesting. The back of the box description was captivating, but it's probably for the best. I didn't watch this as an 8-year-old. Probably would have ruined me at that point in time. That being said, it did sit in my head for ages. Like that poster, like the poster art for this is just iconic as far as I'm concerned. And having watched it, wow. Gorgeous, gorgeous movie. Great performance from Robin Williams. But I am surprised he didn't have more back issues in the ensuing years, considering how much he had to carry in this movie. He is our avenue into this vision of the afterlife, and as such, there's a lot of exposition coming at different times and a lot of thought about the nature of life, the afterlife, what it means to be a person, what it means to be in love, what it means to be a parent. It's a lot of ideas. It's just ton of stuff coming at you. I think that the visual splendor and that sense of wonder as a result get a bit lost amid some of this navel gazing. And I also think the movie is both over and underwritten. There are some things that should be ambiguous that get clear explanations, and others that should be clarified remain frustratingly ambiguous. But, like, full on spoiler alert right now, the big twists about Albert actually being Chris's son Ian, and the tracker actually being the real Albert, and Leona, the random woman, the first woman that he meets in the afterlife, being Chris's daughter Marie. I don't know why. I don't know why that's there. Like the entire like third act twist of like Cuba Gooding Junior has played his son this whole time is completely unnecessary and exists only to like be like a little wrench thrown in for added drama. I think arguably it would work better if Ian is the like the spirit guide from the get go, because then it is more about like more focus can be on repairing whatever strains were in their relationship during life versus us kind of getting like, oh, by the way, here's a flashback to show you there was conflict all along. I don't really care for that. That's beside the point. I do think that the movie captures so much imagination and wonder and mystery over what is debatably one of the biggest questions about the nature of existence. But I do find myself wanting more from its treatment of that mystery. It feels like a take on the Divine Comedy, but with Gnosticism or Theosophism instead of outright Catholic Christianity. And on paper, that's a really cool pitch. But when it tries to give me more answers, I think it winds up stumbling. And that's a shame because is a real treat for the eyes. And I just wish that more of the ideas in it were as captivating.
Yeah, it was a very ambitious is the word perhaps I will use. Like it tries to build up a lot in the way of look at all these beautiful metaphors, look at all these stories, all the questions about existence and reality and all that jazz. And then layering on top of that all of the literal references to fine art that
Yeah.
exist. And all of that, you get to the point where you're like, okay, either you're a beautiful movie or you're hyper metaphorical, but you're going a little too far. So what we really want to focus on, because if we want to pick apart the plot,
Yeah.
I think we're going to be here all day. So instead, what I would love for us to do is talk more specifically about the impact of referencing visual art and filmmaking as an art form.
Mhm.
So if we are talking about, referential, if we're talking about building references into a film, we've talked about referencing other movies, right? So Seven Samurai and Star Wars are the same thing. We've got, remakes, we've got biopics, we've got moral pics, is that's what I'm going to say, is Mr. Rogers' movie. If we are looking now towards a motion picture that actively references static imagery, what's happening here? Because we've already said that the plot is kind of a mess. Like, I skipped half of what happens, and some of it Ben mentioned, right? In your you mentioned it in your first feedback. And so, what is your first impression around, other than it's beautiful, why? And what impact does it have on how we are experiencing the story that's in front of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the idea of referencing more traditional visual art, and particularly paintings, and in this case, particularly paintings from like the Romantic era, these extremely evocative landscapes. I really should have looked up a proper definition of the Romantic era ahead of this, but there's kind of like this idea of I'm going to butcher my attempt to describe this, but this idea of it being like the supernatural, but not in terms of like the otherworldly, but in like the natural world writ large. Super emphasis on natural, if that makes sense. And it's this idea of like finding the beauty in the world around us finding the beauty in the natural world, finding the beauty in the almost everyday occurrences of life on planet Earth. And I think that if that's kind of like your reference point for some of the visual identity of this, it is kind of calling to mind this notion of like a perfected world, this beautiful painted realm that you can live in peace and tranquility and harmony for eternity. I think that that is kind of like, in many ways, one of the things that the Romantics were so deeply focused on. Don't quote me on that. Uh, but yeah, like it is that love of the natural world, and to see it kind of these kind of common images recreated through a dynamic visual medium versus a static one. I think it is kind of like just you're just taking that reference a step further in many ways.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting too because like if we're thinking about the way that they have positioned Annie as the artist and Chris as the lover of art, right?
Hmm.
He is constantly the one trying to be strong for her. He's constantly the one pushing his own feelings, his own emotions away to like lift her up,
Hmm.
help her dreams, you know, be come to fruition. And a lot of the way they interact with each other, even their first conversation, not the meet cute, but after their children have passed, the first real show that we see of their relationship is it's their, and I quote, double D anniversary. We learn that is decision day, where they are choosing to stay together rather than divorce after the
Hmm.
death of their children. And her promise to him is something to the effect of like, I will make your life always an adventure. And
Hmm.
part of that, her gift to him, is this painting that the heaven that he eventually goes to
Hmm.
is based off of. That painting itself is, I'm gonna I'm gonna butcher this word. I have a friend who's an art history, and I'm so sorry if you're listening. Uh, Hieronymus Bosch, The Paradise Lost. It's a
Hieronymus.
3-panel Hieronymus. Thank
Yeah.
you. I am an English major, so it's a 3-panel painting with heaven, earth, and hell, and the fact that her feelings and her vision of the world is what shapes his,
Hmm.
again within the context of the film, obviously, is very interesting to me. That if we're thinking of the natural world as the one that is this idyllic, piece within the Romantic styles, you then see the Bosch painting, which is a Renaissance style of, this is where he wants to live. He sees her as the be all and end all, which, starts to inform the soulmates underplot that they kind of use a little bit. But then you're like, but are you leaning too hard on the art to show that? It's a whole thing.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like the use of and emphasis of these different styles of art that so many people are probably familiar with just because they see them referenced
Hmm.
everywhere, not just, people who like art, but like, you know, uh, a lot of Monet is just everywhere. Frida Kahlo is everywhere. Salvador Dali is everywhere. And so even if you don't know who these artists are, you probably already have like
Hmm.
a reference of what they are or who they are, or even just what their paintings look like, even if you don't know who they are.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm kind of wavering here because I don't know if there's a point, right? Like
Hmm.
at some point, there's too many references and it becomes a little bit muddy around the message.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I, I mean, I think like with the paintings and those explicit visual references,
mm,
like alluding to other works, in some cases, like if I'm thinking about movies and illusions in movies, I think probably one of the most like common ones is the iconic 2001 match cut. So 2001: A Space Odyssey, you got the apes are smashing up some bones, and one of them whips a bone upwards into the air, and the camera tracks up and follows it spinning. And as it kind of like hits this certain angle, match cut to a space station floating in space, and like it's this implication of there. I mean, without getting into too much of the plot, there's like this whole like monolith there, and the implication is this monolith has influenced human evolution to such a point that they are able to create a space station. So that's like the iconic match cut. There are other kinds of match cuts in movies where you match like framing or movement to from one to the other, from one scene to another. But this is like one that has kind of like transcended genre. Like the Barbie movie had a really explicit reference to it.
Yes.
Most recently. But so like the point of those illusions is to kind of like, I suppose like just draw attention and make explicit reference to works that have come before, to like an inspirational work. In some cases, it can be like far more metaphorical and like we're making this reference to get that planted in your mind. So we want you thinking about that while we're talking about the rest of what we're doing. In the case of this movie, I think it is like, I think those references exist just as like a celebration of art. I think that's perfectly fine. It does get a little muddy and messy. Like there's a point where, and the movie very wisely kind of transfers out of like the very Van Gogh impressionistic take on romanticism to a much more classically romantic visual style after, Chris meets not Albert and drinks the paint, but it's supposed to be. Anyways, it's a whole thing. Yeah, I think that like the point that we're trying to like create there is that like Chris is an art lover because of his love for his wife. Like I think that just like transcends everything else, and I think I don't know. There's probably something in there about. That we could probably dig into about like the concept of like the tortured artist, which this movie kind of leans on a little too much in some ways. There's a bit more in there though about like, I don't know, like you and I are both creative people, and I think our respective spouses are incredible boosters of the creative stuff we do. Like I think that so when my read on Chris's world being so inspired by like painterly things is just like it is such a reflection of his true love for his wife, and that to me is imminently relatable, even if the rest of this movie's philosophy drives me insane.
Well, I mean, as we're looking at that, there's also, the obvious title reference, right? Not a famous piece of fine art, but a famous soliloquy, right? For those unfamiliar, in Hamlet, the quote is, "For in that sleep of death what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause." And Hamlet's referencing suicide. Like he's thinking, should I just kill myself? Because this is nonsense, right? And it's framing the entire thing around that question with, again, that much more cultural reference on top of all of what we're given. In having Annie's suffering span, 5 years effectively between the death of her children and the death of Chris.
Yeah.
As we watch the changes in her art, her physical presentation, the colors that are used to mark her, and so on, we also get shifts in the landscape that Chris is adventuring through. And on top of that, then the different time periods of paintings and styles of paintings. So, yeah, the love and adoration was actually, I was reading an article on this, kind of an afterthought of her being an artist, which, yeah, she was not originally an artist, but that was how they communicated their connection across this very visually striking, story. And so one wonders, okay, guys, did someone have that cool idea of, okay, What Dreams May Come is a cool sonnet, but let's talk about what dreams may come after we shuffle off this mortal coil. But also, what if we did it through paintings that
Yeah.
transcend death? But wait, what if... And it just kind of spiraled into a very complex, very unnecessarily, like, I think you said navel gazing,
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
philosophy around it.
Yeah. I mean, I think like this is getting to boy, we're getting to some interesting stuff here because I mean like you're talking about the quote being a reference to the very famous "to be or not to be" soliloquy that Hamlet does in its Act 2, Scene 1.
I-
Don't quote me on that. I used to know that one by heart. But that specific line is like, "To be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream, and in that dream, what
Yeah.
dreams may come." Okay,
Yes.
I'm showing off a little bit there, but it's interesting that like your read on that is that you're citing that particular soliloquy, but I think of that particular quote, like "what dreams may come," as less about the act of like taking one's own life, and more about like that mystery of what comes next and a fascination, not necessarily an unhealthy fascination about it. The Laurence Olivier version of that soliloquy is remarkable because of the energy that he gives it. Like it's very like
Yeah.
down, depressing, and then he gets to sleep, perchance to dream, and he's like jumping upwards, like suddenly like excited by possibility.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like my read on what the title's getting at for this. It's less about it is certainly hinting at that kind of darker aspect, but it is certainly more about the joy in the mystery. Also interesting that you bring up that originally she's not Annie's originally not a painter, in whatever original script this was. This movie is based on a book
Oh.
by Richard Matheson, I believe. I'm gonna triple check that I'm right on this.
Oh, man, I didn't even...
Yeah.
Neat.
Novel of the same name, What Dreams May Come. Richard Matheson also wrote I Am Legend, which is another movie that gets weird in its treatment of the source material, particularly in the third act, despite being incredibly strong up until that point. So it's weird that happened twice with this guy's works. Yeah, I that's a lot of rambling to say that. I think like the it is possible for us to read so much into some of these references, versus what I think the main reference that they're making throughout this, the main allusion, like I think the visual things are certainly interesting, but they seem to more reflect state of mind or like hopefulness. Like there's that beauty and sense of wonder in paradise, and it's replaced by nightmarish hellscapes when they're in hell. And you know where else we've seen that? The Divine Comedy, because this movie is just the Divine Comedy.
Yeah, honestly, fair. I mean, I think it's particularly... I don't want to say interesting because that's just repetitive, but like the fact that we have such different readings on it, particularly in light of the fact that Chris and Annie have very different perspectives on it, even before all of the tragedies, right? We have Annie being very... I mean, she is the kite and he is the string that holds her down, and not in a bad way. You know what I mean? Like there have been untold numbers of medias telling that tale, right?
Yeah.
And I think our spouses are probably not dissimilar to that in a lot of regards. And as we try to ascribe meaning to a lot of these things, to your point, like some of it's beautiful. There's not necessarily a rhyme or reason to it. But also, the thing that saves Annie at the end of the day, at the end of the film, the only way that Chris is able to get her out of hell is to join her in her misery.
Mm-hmm.
And that dichotomy itself of, on the one hand, basking in the glory and the joy of being alive and the questions of the what is next, and that's really cool, and like
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. But also, sometimes, as Annie says multiple times, when you win, you lose. And everything is on fire and everything is trash. And his ability to then join her in that, as we see visually in terms of like the color palette, we've descended into hell. He still has some color in his cheeks, if you will, but Annie is gray. She is basically like gray like a corpse, like you know. And when he finally is able to join her in her grief and acknowledge that, you know, sometimes you just have to feel the pits of despair,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes some things are just so much that that's when she comes back to life, because she's finally had someone join her there in a way that is empathetic, and he finally understands it. And then like the color appears in her cheeks, her lipstick comes back, basically. Like we have that shift, and I think it's maybe trying to do both and show that it's okay to have both perspectives. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because some things are, frankly, too terrible to comprehend. I'm not a parent. I cannot even begin to imagine what it would be like to lose a child. And so her, you know, needing someone to just understand and show her that they understand, particularly Chris, who is her, you know, soulmate in the context of, you know, everything. There's something very impactful about the fact that we can delight in the joys and the mysteries, but also we're just human, and
Mm-hmm.
we can also acknowledge and feel the depths of despair sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think also like the movie presents this notion that like hell is self-inflicted. All these people are trapped in hell because of the pain that they feel. You know, this
Yeah.
notion of like it's your own guilt over things you have done that is trapping you versus your there's not necessarily any judgment from on high doing this, even though the guy who is not Albert mentioned, like Chris explicitly asks like where's God in all this, and Albert says like, oh, he's up there doing his thing, which
He
is like, okay, interesting.
Well, he
But
actually says he's shouting "I love you" and wondering why we can't hear him.
yes,
Yeah.
okay, good point. But then the idea that like it then like skews away from this very like almost like in my mind a very like Nirvana like take on enlightenment and paradise, like this very Buddhist like take on these things, where as long as you are self-actualized, like everything's golden. It then immediately takes this left turn to say, hey, if you take your own life though, you're damned. Like
Yeah.
even though there's no one doing that to you, that's how it
Mm-hmm.
works. Which is
Yeah.
deeply, deeply weird and confusing. And like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I had a whole rant written about that, but it just feels mean spirited now. Um,
Well,
yeah, I don't fully get that.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. If we're thinking then in terms of, we want to reference art. We're
Mhm.
making a movie. We're making a movie about the afterlife. We want to reference some really cool art. Where a lot of the really cool art is hellish, like
Yeah.
paintings of the river Styx, paintings of, you know, like go down the list, right?
Yeah.
And how then, as you're, you know, putting a book together into this thing, how do you make it so that someone, how do you make it so that the person you're trying to rescue is in hell, but they're not a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I haven't read the book, didn't even know it existed, so that's pretty cool. But like, I'm now curious because how did that work? Right? Like
Yeah.
she's in hell in the film because she has died by suicide. And so he has to go rescue her. So we get to have this big, beautiful and terrifying shift from,
Mm-hmm.
color and vibrancy and whimsy and wonder to, naked bodies pulling their ship down in a giant storm, devils and demons. And
Mm-hmm.
there are some weird shots in there that I'm like, we're going to hand wave that because that doesn't make any sense. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But like, at what point are you justifying the plot to make sure you have the visuals?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah. It's. And again, like I did the loosest bit of reading on the novel that this is based off of, and apparently the ending is different. It is not the explicitly happy ending. There's much more ambiguity because it is not that they choose to reincarnate and do it all over again. Is that they are kind of like they're in that cycle of each time we do this, we are closer to that self-actualized state where we can live in peace for eternity.
Yeah.
This movie is not doing that. This movie is explicitly like, gotta go rescue her. Because, like, yeah, we are vaguely Buddhist, but we're more Judeo-Christian than we'd actually care to admit.
Yeah.
So, and it's in those cases like, I mean, what you were just saying, like, is the plot using the plot to justify the visuals, like that visual of them in the boat being pulled over by the souls of the damned in the ocean is explicitly from a painting called The Bark of Dante by Eugene Delacroix. It's a freaky looking painting, real cool. In many ways, I think that if this was a bit more explicitly based off of Dante's The Divine Comedy, it probably clicks a bit more. I think it is in that like kind of different take on a less Christian take on the afterlife and religion. It introduces these wrinkles that I'm like no, like this is the logic doesn't line up. Which is a very silly criticism on my part, but it bugs me.
I mean, I don't think so. I think there is an amount of hand waving a person can do to really enjoy a movie if you're paying attention, right? Like, and that's not to say, there have been so many movies that we've watched just for this podcast where the plot is like, yeah, okay. It's a good movie. We like the movie, but like that's broken and that doesn't make sense and your world building logic is a big old question mark and why did you choose to do that? And I certainly would not be the first person to say I'm sure this film doesn't really have a consistent ideology. And that's not to say it's bad. It's just like if you're looking for a consistent world building and kind of looking a little bit deeper, it's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I mean like not even like I think that there's like this idea in particularly in like modern fiction that world building is a thing you do. And if you just do it well enough, you'll have a good story. And I think this is like a movie where it's like they have a good story, but then they try and introduce some details. It's like you really don't need those details. Like I don't think we needed. That's beside the point. I think like I don't know. I think like one of my takeaways from this is that it is just beautiful. It does just look incredible, and it won an Academy Award for visual effects. I think it got really mixed reviews from contemporary critics, but it's certainly a really ambitious movie that's trying to do a lot in a relatively short amount of time, and I think that alone is admirable. I think the idea that it really went for this like visual identity that it has. It really went for that look and feel, and I think it lands it more than it misses the mark in that
Yeah.
respect. So, I mean, I love it for that, if nothing else.
Yeah. I mean, I think that begs the question too around if we're using this podcast as an excuse to talk about our favorite movies,
Yeah.
right? This is not my favorite movie because of the plot. This is one of my favorite movies because it's beautiful and it breaks my heart, right?
Yeah.
And even if we start to look similar with, I'll be honest, similar with a lot of the greatest paintings in the world, right? The closer you get to it, the worse they look. Like, go online to like the Met website or the Met website, or like honestly any like the Louvre or whatever, and start to zoom in on some of the like world famous, like this is the best painting in the world, this is a Monet and it's wonderful, and then you get closer and you're like, that doesn't really, it's kind of weird looking, or like it's kind of muddy or whatever, because you're meant to stand back and look at the whole thing as a whole rather than just like inch by inch by inch by inch. And that's in the most squished in of metaphors here. That's kind of what the movie does for me. Because if I zoom out, things like the way they play with color around Chris and Annie's relationship, for example, which we'll talk about a bit more in detail in a minute, or how they insert different references to different artists and time periods and all that, and you know, different visual signatures for different characters and so on. If we zoom out and just look at that, it hits it out of the park. But as you start to dig in and look at the little details, you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like the entire concept of like impressionist painting is just like, you know, these unrelated dabs of paint come together to create this beautiful whole. And I mean, like that's what painting is in general. Like you're using a lot of, you know, you're playing with light and shadow. Filmmaking has so much trickery involved. If you look too closely at everything there, things would fall apart too.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like you shouldn't look closely. I just think that like some things are better at standing up to scrutiny than others.
Yes.
Which I think is kind of where we're both landing on that front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably accurate. And so speaking of things that do kind of stand up to scrutiny, at least I think so.
Yeah.
I'm curious of your thoughts of it. Early on, like right at the top of the film, from the first moment where he says, you know, when I was a young man, I met a beautiful girl by a lake, or whatever the specific line is, we are very much hit in the face with the red-blue color signatures for Chris and Annie. Chris is blue, Annie is red. And throughout the film, we get moments where one or the other is wearing the other person's colors, or where we have bits of purple because they've come together, or where Annie is wearing a completely different color because she is so far removed from their relationship, or her children, or their children rather, are colored coded differently, and when she is in a specific moment of grief or he is finding something out or whatever, they all have very distinct signatures. And I think as I was watching it this time, playing spot the red or spot the blue on each Annie and Chris was really kind of fun, because I really like how they visually code the two of them, as they sometimes focus on one person in the relationship, sometimes focus on the other. Sometimes Annie is completely like, she has lost herself fully, but she is very much like brought back to life by Chris, and vice versa. And that I found was really well done in terms of like consistency and like playing with visual cue. So what I'm throwing it to you now. Did you spot it? Did you like it? Did you think it was overdone? Like, what was your like impression of it?
All right. This is where I embarrass myself.
Oh no.
Because I did not see the colors at play. I do remember like the bright, vivid red of, is it the sail on the sailboat?
It is the sail on the sailboat, but she also has a bright red, like sarong that she takes off and turns into
Yes.
a blanket
Yeah, I
when she
remember
sits down
that.
next to him. Yeah.
That stood out, and they're both wearing white, and it's just like very like dreamlike and beautiful.
Yes.
Um, and then of course it comes back. Like I noticed more like there's the repeated image of the boats,
Hmm.
that bird's eye shot, and
Yeah.
it's like the duplicate shot at the beginning and the end. I noticed that more. Um, yeah, I'm embarrassed to admit I did not spot repeating color motifs in this.
Okay. No,
That's on
that's
me.
fine. That's fine. Yeah, it's one of those things that I don't know if I noticed it the first time I watched it,
Yeah,
but like as I rewatched it over the years, because I mean this movie is almost 20 years old. I don't want to think about that. Um, it's no, sorry, almost 30 years old. I can math.
no 20.
20. Yeah. Um,
Wait,
it's
yes,
1998, so almost 30.
yeah,
Oh God. It is. It got more and more obvious, and then this time, while I was looking specifically for like art and color references, I went, "Oh, okay," because like the there are moments where Annie has. We'll take the last scene
yeah,
when they not the boats, but like when he reawakens in heaven. Annie has rescued him, and he is back in his suit and tie with the blue tie, and she is in a blue dress because he has brought her back to life.
hmm,
And then shift forward in time as they're making that decision to go back to where they came from, back to Jersey or whatever. She's back in her red dress because that's her coloring,
hmm,
right? And they do this over and over and over again. And then, you know, there is also a motif across the entire film of a purple, I think it's a wisteria tree.
yeah,
Um, what does red and blue make? Purple. And so it is their lives were mixed together, and then the dead flower petals all over the house where Annie goes after she dies by suicide are scattered all over the floor because their life together has gone.
yeah,
The roses that were once one of her pride and joys are dead on their stalks, right?
hmm,
And as such with her own, sense of self and all these things. So uh, I think it's a very cool thing as you go through and like play spot the red and blue.
hmm.
Um, but it's interesting to me that you didn't notice it at all. Like actually, like sincerely, because you're usually pretty good at being like, color patterns, let's go.
Yeah. I mean, like I did only watch this the one time,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
the first time through, I'm just like trying to take as much in as I
Hmm.
possibly could, and this is definitely something that would probably benefit from a rewatch on my end. I did note the tree. Um,
Mm.
the tree in particular is like it starts off like explicitly, I guess, like designed to be as beautiful as possible. Like it's gorgeous. It is evocative. It's very much in that like romanticist style. But then, like as we kind of encounter more of Annie as a character, and particularly in her grief, the tree becomes much more like a weeping willow. Is much become like the tones on it become much cooler. The
Hmm.
leaves become much more drawn. Like it looks a lot sadder. That stood out a lot to me. Um, I found that was like a really interesting kind of bit of like like metaphysical. The world starts to reflect like the joint
Hmm.
reality of Chris's experience in heaven and Annie's sorrow still stuck on Earth. I thought that was really interesting.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's I don't know, like it's really interesting. There's like this dreamlike state that a lot of the movie is presented in, and I think like admittedly, I again only watched it the one time, but as we get further and further into the depths of hell, the colors are much more washed out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I really lose track of color at that point. I did think it was cool though that like hell is distance from God or hell is distance from heaven. Like there's not like an actual, metaphysical place, but like the further away you are from like that source of joy and love, the worse you feel. And I think
Mhm.
that their visual representation of hell, as much as it draws on like that very much like, oh yeah, there's a burning landscape here and there's all this here, that those kind of like classic tropes, it does also wind up drawing on like you're just alone with your grief and your pain and your sorrow by the end, and all the color gets washed away. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, the tree is particularly interesting because it is a new addition to the landscape in her grief. Because
Mhm.
there's the original tree that he is standing under that is um what is it? Two men staring at the moon was the name of the
Yeah, I
painting.
have it pulled up,
Um
so I'll take a look. It
yeah.
is there. There are three variations on it. It's two men contemplating the moon, and man and woman contemplating the moon.
Yes. That's the one.
Sorry, just two variations. But yeah, that's by
Yeah.
Caspar David Friedrich.
Yeah, so that painting of Chris standing under this tree was a direct reference to Two Men Contemplating the Moon. That exists on the center panel of the 3-panel work. The tree that gets washed out
Yeah,
is the third panel, is hell. And
right,
so
right,
as
right.
we see her wash away the leaves and the life and their life together, in a heavy-handed metaphor here again, that's where we start to see that literal washing out of color and the, all that jazz. So it's a cool
Yeah,
shift. And then as we start to descend into hell, where everything is basically gray, everything is stone, everything is cold, give or take some weird exceptions as they descend fully into hell, because there is a ship called the Cerberus as they travel into hell, and then there's a bunch of, I truly don't know what it's supposed to be. There's a bunch of people who are like demons? A question mark? I don't know. They're not all people going to hell. Some of them do, and hilariously they're all carrying bags of baggage, which it felt like a weird joke. But anyway, there's like bright red in some of those people that are like screaming at the group, and I'm like, why? Wait, where did this come from? What is the where's the metaphor? I'm trying to find the metaphor, and this movie forces me to really like question everything visual that I
yeah,
see, which at some point turns into, again, that very muddy mess of like, there's too much paint on this canvas, you guys. Maybe tone it down a smidge.
yeah. Well, like when they're at the, I mean, explicitly the metaphor that they're going for, the reference that they're going for with like the ship. Cerberus is the three-headed guard dog to the underworld in Greek mythology, and is this ship representing the gates of hell in the movie. They descend through the gates of hell, and I think like to me that is the section, like that bit is much more that classically inspired depiction of the underworld. And to me, like I'm looking at I have pulled up the Bosch painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights, and it's that third panel. It's just
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that's just nightmarish. Cool.
Yeah,
And that's what this is.
absolutely.
I don't know where I'm going with that. I just think like that, yeah, that's neat. It's cool as hell.
Cool as hell, you say.
Yeah.
Um, honestly, I think that's kind of the conclusion that I think we both kind of are dancing around a little bit of. This movie is cool. It tries to do a lot of really cool stuff. Maybe too much stuff.
It's the Marge
Maybe.
Simpson. I just think it's neat.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I do have to call out specifically, like I was thinking about this as we've been talking, and I think like a lot of the plot could kind of like rely on a lot less dialogue, or like the idea of like I could put this on, have like a Pink Floyd album going at the same time, and that would probably be an interesting experience. But then I would have to like unmute it for the random Werner Herzog cameo in Hell. Like As the guy who's
Uh,
Chris is like walking over the faces of the damned that are like set in stone and frozen in stone, and one of them just starts calling out like my son, and it's the classic Werner Herzog voice, which I can't do, and like this is the most bonkers moment in the movie to me because Robin Williams as Chris immediately shouts out Papa. uh,
there are some
like
weird beats in this movie.
it's real weird. Um, and I guess the idea is like that because they're spending so much time in hell, they are forgetting who they are. Maybe that's the implication of why, you know, Robin Williams thinks Werner Herzog is his father. It's just out of context. It's very weird. In context, it is actually a fun moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like
Uh,
that. And then you get the weird random reveal that the tracker, played by Max von Sydow, is
mhm.
actually Albert.
Yep.
I don't know.
It's a weird, unnecessary thing.
Yeah.
Kind of.
There's
I have a lot of. Yeah.
there's no
It's.
reason why these characters can't just be
I
who
mean,
they're supposed to be in the beginning.
so. Well, there is though, right? Because as Chris walks into the house, Annie doesn't recognize him.
Hmm.
It's because, as established throughout throughout the film, that you see what you want to see, right? Or you see when you want to see, perhaps is the phrasing I think that they use.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that has to be established before he sees Annie, because when he does see Annie, she doesn't recognize him, and we need to know why she doesn't recognize him, blah, 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 blah. And so a lot of that exposition kind of, or those tricks or whatever you want to call them, kind of feel like they had to be there to make that last scene kind of work, but the kind of, a lot of it doesn't feel like, it feels kind of weird. Like, I don't know. There were
Yeah.
moments where I'm like, that was unnecessary.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean,
just reunite with your. He also
yeah.
doesn't think about his kids a lot. He comes to heaven and he's not like, oh my God, my children are here. Like, he gets super excited because his dog is there, and then he's
Yeah.
like, are you not going to ask about your kids, sir? What are you doing?
Yeah. And
Like,
I get that they're trying to like seed that conflict between Chris and his son,
yeah.
but we're not really given that full like that conflict doesn't really emerge until like halfway through the movie. Like it takes a bit for that to be like teased out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a flaw. Like I think like if you're going to have that be this grand reveal, I think you need to establish that as one of the central conflicts much earlier on. Like maybe
Yeah.
the idea being like I don't know, it sounds so melodramatic to like say it out loud, but it's the idea of like I don't know. Maybe when the kids died, there should have been some more unfinished business. Like that should have been a
Yeah.
lot more explicit than it was. If you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
go down this avenue, so
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm interrupting you, but I also think that like the notion of like I think it can also just be like, hey, if you're in hell, by the way, you gradually forget who you are. That can just be a line of dialogue versus like, well, you only see when you're ready to see. Saying it like 20 times throughout the
Yes.
movie, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where I'm landed on that.
Yeah. I mean, what I was gonna say is that, like, if there had been a little bit of that, again, time is weird in this movie,
Hmm.
and if there had been a little bit more, even a scene, because even a scene that was basically like Chris and his son Ian having an argument, and that was the last time we ever spoke, like that
Hmm.
would have changed it for me
Hmm.
entirely,
Oh,
because
yeah.
then at least you'd have some of that context of maybe why he'd be afraid to see his children, because the last time they spoke he was kind of a jerk,
Yeah.
you know? But instead we get this trickle truth that dilutes, if I can use that pun, the tension around it, and makes me think that he's kind of a jerk for not looking for his children
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah.
Like, I get also that they're sort of trying to show that as much as he loved his children, his wife is his, like, ride or die, like,
Hmm.
100%, like, she is his person, he is her person, etc. But don't do that at the expense of me thinking he's kind of a bad father.
Mhm.
Like, that doesn't play that well, and it
Yeah.
doesn't feel good.
Yeah, there are a lot of weird implications in this movie. Like
Yeah.
again, like we've just talked about how like you can't think too much about it because it gets weirder the more you think about it.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, I can't even get into that. I can't even get into that. So
Yeah.
I'm going to bring this back as I think we're nearing our wrap
We
up
sure
time.
are.
But I'm
Yeah.
going to bring this back to our podcast's namesake because there's another movie that features characters interacting with a very painted landscape, a painterly world.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And it was directed by, of course, Akira Kurosawa. His movie Dreams has an extended sequence where a character inhabits the paintings of Van Gogh. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, chats with Vincent himself.
Hmm.
Guess who plays Vincent?
Who?
Marty Scorsese.
Huh.
So
Okay.
I'm making the
Okay.
case we gotta watch that movie next.
Okay.
After the other movies we have to watch.
I was going to say, we already have the text written, Ben, for what's next. I can't do edits this quickly. No. I mean, put it on the list, man, because I am always delighted to watch a movie that is a treat for the eyes. Because, like, plot, okay, I like plot. Plot is important, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
However, sometimes I just want a beautiful movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm already diving into our closing summary. So, Ben, if you want to learn about... If you want to learn about visual references in film, what dreams may come? Why? Go.
Yeah, like, why not? I think, like, we talked a lot about this, and I'm trying to find my notes here because I wrote down a nice little succinct summary. You should watch this because it looks amazing. I am the person who, if you've listened to any of these episodes, you know I love to overthink movies. I love to overthink things in general. I love to analyze and I love to pick at stories. I love picking those things apart and trying to figure out why they work or why they don't work for me. I'm a weirdo. I get a lot of joy out of that. I like being like, this is broken and here's why. Not the best habit of mine. I like to think about what movies are telling me, what they're trying to do. But sometimes you can just watch something because it looks real cool, and that's totally fine.
Yes.
And on that note, Farrah, if you are just looking to watch something on a Friday night, why What Dreams May Come?
The same reason, because it's beautiful. Look, taking away the plot, because let's be honest, the plot's broken, as we've talked about ad nauseum. It is at its core a beautiful story about a man who loves his wife and a wife who loves her husband. It is visually striking. When they made the film, they, did some really incredible work, both with practical effects and with, visual effects and digital effects and all this stuff. They were truly groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And if you just want to look at something that's real pretty, do that. But also have Kleenex because you will cry. Probably, because there's a lot of sad stuff.
Yeah.
So be sure you're prepared to be sad, and maybe have some time to watch something cute and fluffy afterwards.
But you're also gonna have moments of intense joy watching this.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
I'm trying to balance out at the very last second all my critiques of this, but that opening sequence in like I think that they have like the water fight.
Yes.
And then there's like the rainfall starts. That's all beautifully shot. That is gorgeous to look at. It's just stunning.
Yeah.
For that sequence alone, it's worth watching.
Yep.
So, with all of that out of the way, and we have cried through your pick, what's coming up next?
I wrote the intro for Ben to read, and so he gets to read my intros for me, and I love it. Power that I have over this podcast. So the next couple of episodes, we're doing some cool stuff, some little different things. Next time, we're going to be talking to me. And I'll be walking y'all through some of my all-time favorite films. We're going to be talking about why I actually love films, why I'm such a fan, why I want to be an actor, all these things. And then after that, we've got Ben's triple threat on deck, where we are talking about Todd Phillips' Joker, alongside Martin Scorsese's King of Comedy and Taxi Driver. And then, After that, we will be looking closely at the films that made Ben such a film nerd, which is, boy howdy, be prepared.
Could be interesting. Yeah, I think we will probably need not just one, but several cups of coffee. So, of course, join us every Tuesday wherever you get your fine podcasts.
And speaking of where you can get your podcasts,
Hang
you can
on.
find...
Hang
what?
on. I just said
What?
every Tuesday. Every other Tuesday.
Hey, we're on all of the podcasts all of the time because we have a backlog now
We
of
do.
like 15 episodes. So go enjoy our backlog as well. You can find this podcast on Patreon as Coffee and Kurosawa. You can also find us on Blue Sky as Coffee Kurosawa Pod. You can find me on Blue Sky, Substack, and Letterboxd as Farrah Sarpkaya, and at sarpkaya.ca where I lend my voice as a voice actor when I don't have laryngitis. Ben, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Blue Skies at Benjimon and on Letterboxd as at Benjimon. I am tracking everything I'm watching for this podcast and trying to share some thoughts there as well. So check them out.
Amazing. And that's it. Coming in just under the hour. So thank you. We hope you enjoyed. And join us next time for Coffee and Kurosawa. Goodbye.